And I said, no, it's not. And he said, the internet is on a microfiche. We're trying to get it to Mexico. And I was like, no, we're really not. And then like a year later, everyone was doing all their business over email. So times do change. So I started in the game industry because I was apparently an expert on the internet superhighway about 1995. So over there on the right, and if I knew how to use my laser pointer, nope. It's like a game. There it is. Oh, does it do angles? Yeah, there, that one. The Zork series is one of the first graphical adventures. If you were a classroom, I would say, what's graphical? And you would raise your hand. And I would expect you to say, it's pictures. And instead, the 10-year-old will be like, my graphics card is like a blah, 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 blah. They know more than you think. So I worked on the first adventure games, which were actually text adventures. That's how old we all are, is that we're famous for the beginning of games that were made out of pictures, not just words, which is pretty funny. And I went on from working in games to working on a bunch of big universes in games, and then having my own game developer, which I ran. It was called 7 Studios with my husband at the time for 16 years. And from then on, I got to know Marvel. We made Fantastic Four. I'm famous for, I say to little kids, I made Spider-Man for an amazing device on your television that would control the pictures. It's called the PlayStation 1. And they're like, whoa. Look, I can pivot. And then from, eventually we sold our company to Activision Blizzard, and where my little brother still makes Call of Duty. If any of your nephews, housekeepers, friends, those people need to talk to someone about that, I'm available for that as well. So we're sort of the Von Trapp family of video games. My child works for the Overwatch League. You will ask your children, that is also a thing. Esports, we can talk about that later. But so then I got to know Marvel from that, and after we sold the company, I said, I really have to write a book. That is like the thing I came to the planet to do, but I never did it because I was too chicken. So that's another story for another day, but right there, Beautiful Creatures on the left was my first book, which I wrote with my child's 3rd grade teacher because my child was so incredibly naughty that the only person I saw that year was my child's 3rd grade teacher. And so we became close friends, and we were also the only 2 people in Los Angeles who read books instead of just optioning them. So that book went on to release in 50 countries, and that was when I got to know sort of the world of teenagers, which has become very important in my life. And I don't know if you know, half the planet is 25 and under. And that is sort of my specialty, is global 25 and under. So I work in a content market of people who see the world entirely differently than you do. And that has been like the great gift of my life. Beautiful Creatures became a movie, a terrible, sometimes terrible, perceived terrible movie, which is great because it brought me back to Uni, my classroom roommate of class of 1989, because I fled to Hong Kong the weekend it came out, and I was like, I don't want to see the box office results anymore. Which taught me a lot about embracing the ups and downs of the content market. And then I started writing with Marvel. I wrote Black Widow novels, and which led to writing a monthly comic, Captain Marvel. Icon's sci-fi book of mine has also been in development for a million years. Mighty Captain Marvel and Life of Captain Marvel up there are the project I'm going to talk about today. So that was like a totally long ramble, but this is basically what I do, which is build worlds, add to worlds, live in worlds, expand fictional universes, create fictional universes, and it kind of honestly feels the same to me whether I started it or I work on it. By the time you're writing book 6 in your series, you are working in a franchise that it doesn't feel any different than working with Black Widow, who's been around for, 80 years. So I also build festivals, which is, I've now learned to call location-based content. Identity communities. Identity fandom communities and location-based content, which means book festivals. That has been really fun. I grew up in a super religious family, and I'm not capable of believing in things. It turns out I believe in humans. So I have this huge congregational urge that I don't have anything to do with. So it goes back into literacy nonprofits, basically. So we had last month 30,000 kids at Y'all West in Santa Monica at a public high school. And that is one of the things I've done that I feel the best about. For you finance people, it's sort of the equivalent of a roll-up of authors. We consolidated people who work with teens and basically own that space. And it's amazing because it's for nothing. We make no money on it. It's just for love and sharing, and that's kind of, I think, the special sauce to the whole thing. We do a lot of prison visits. That's down on the right with my friend Veronica Roth, Chicagoan. And Charleston, South Carolina is one of our big festivals, Y'all West in Santa Monica up on the right. We have a 50-person kid board who runs it, which is another amazing thing. If you want to make content or festivals or anything that 25 and unders want to go to, they need to make it, not you. And that was one of the first things we learned. Cats versus Robots is another part of sort of identity building, which is a book I wrote with my family, about my family, that my trans kid illustrated at age 17, did 2 volumes. So that was another fun sort of kind of world building that doesn't actually just happen in a book. This is the flip side, is that I've learned community stories are the powerful stories. So when you assemble a big community, it also becomes an activism group where you end up raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for immigration response, or you have outreach festivals. You end up becoming de facto, you use your voice for a community. So it's not exactly politics, but it's more advocacy, which is politics. So this is the thing I want to talk about quickly, and then we will get to your questions, because you guys are smarter than I am. But it's been really interesting to work with changing communities. If community stories are important, our communities change all the time. The rate of change increases because of the internet. So you are now looking at a generation whose brains are nothing like yours. And it's really interesting because you can't present to them the heroes of Stan Lee 80 years ago without some radical pivots. So this was my problem. The Captain Marvel problem, which was really seen as a problem by Marvel, is that Captain Marvel's origin story sucks. Okay? It sucked. That's the word. And it was my job to fix it. Have any of you seen the Captain Marvel movie? Thank you. So you can see, even in that movie, how hard that was, how hard they were working to try to explain. That became an origin story for the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is a lot of load to carry. And that's the thing that happens, is you have to explain 80 years or 50 years. How do you do it? Classic brands. Some classic brands don't work for new generations. You can see on the right, Carol Danvers was a secretary at NASA, right? And that was her role. I'm friends with Jerry Conway, who's the guy that Stan Lee actually said, Jerry, I need a girl, I need a Wonder Woman. Make me a girl hero. It would be really good if you could work the name Marvel into it. And they basically found Captain Marvel, who was a male alien warrior, Kree warrior, and said, okay, this is gonna be our Wonder Woman. How are we gonna work this out? And they pivoted that story to fit her. So when I'm dealing with a story that can't be pitched in an elevator, that nobody can explain, that you can't say it's an Amazon's daughter, right? What do you do with that? So I tell kids all the time, it's really important to pay attention to your opinions. And the beginning of creating is having an opinion about something. So if you play a video game and you think it sucks, tell me why it sucks. If you think a book is trash, why is it trash? If you hate the ending of Game of Thrones, why do you hate it? Like really concretely, why? If you love it, why? Like pay attention to yourself. That's my #1 piece of advice, millennials and teens. Pay attention to yourself. Your opinions truly matter and they are the beginnings of worlds. So you have to be the first person to take yourself seriously. No one is gonna do that for you, except Amherst College, by the way. Small college is where I learned my opinions matter. And nobody can take that away from you. That has stayed with me my entire life. So this is the thing. A hero's journey does not look like a hero's journey when the hero is a woman. And that became the critical problem, was reframing a sucky hero's journey, right? So you all learn about the hero's journey in college, right? And the problem that you set off to conquer, as Tim was saying last night, I don't remember who was saying it. Is it man versus man? Is it man versus the world? Is it man versus the environment? Thank you. Like, yes, it's all of those things. The problem is, guys, those hero stories are about men, right? No one is saying, is it women versus the world, women versus environment, women, they sometimes say, is it women versus other women? But that's it. So how do you frame a mess of a hero's journey when you are not a man in the man versus man? So in comics, in particular, because they are so closely tied to the ground zero of popular culture, right? You get people who don't necessarily read books, which is why I love it. For a girl superhero, the hero's journey is always the journey from being a side character to a protagonist. Okay? Like, that is the real journey. And how do you help that character redefine herself as a hero? So you can say, Stan Lee can say, let's define this character as a hero, but that doesn't mean in the inner life of that character, they're gonna see themselves as a hero. So it was a big problem for me until I realized that the mess was actually the journey. So the most important journey, a female character, female hero, and guess what, guys? A female creator or a female reader is going to make is the journey to center stage, is the journey to seeing themselves as a hero, is the journey to being capable of being on a hero's journey. And you guys have to remember this, like class of '89, when we were growing up, who were the women heroes we had in media? We had I Dream of Jeannie, who Major Anthony Nelson would say, Jeannie, get back in your bottle. She would literally bow and go back in. We had Bewitched. We had a powerful witch who was not allowed to use her powers because Durwood didn't like it. I mean, I don't know about women in the audience, but when I saw Wonder Woman, I was crying before the credits started. Like, a scene of seeing like women's bodies in the like Matrix slow-mo, like I was like sobbing by then. I like almost barfed. I saw it was my friend Simran Sethi, who is in charge of Netflix India, or was until 2 days ago, and we were both just like, we practically got asked to leave. We were just like, and it is that experience. You see it with Black Panther also, where like there was that meme that was like, oh, is this what you guys feel like all the time? Like, this is what this must be like. But it's a real thing. You cannot write a hero if you do not think you can be one. You cannot be a protagonist unless you know how to be a protagonist in your own life. And that is something men are naturally taught. Harry Potter even, like we get to be Hermione. Hermione was seen as progress because we got to be brainy. I was glad. But I always wanted to be Dumbledore. I wanted to be Yoda. I want to be Merlin. I always wanted to be the smartest mage. In fact, that's sort of how I identify. That's going to be my new D&D character. But that is not a thing we naturally had, and it's so exciting then to have it, to be able to be a Jedi, right? I got to be in love with Han Solo. I was super in love with Han Solo. I crank called him for 6 months from girls' school, true story. We got one of the girls had his phone number because her father was an attorney in his office, and in his law office. And we were smart enough to call and ask for his children, Benjamin and Willard, every day. I had a sweatshirt that said Margaret Ford. Girls' school will do that to you. See, green guy, you were supposed to do that by now. But I never got to be Han Solo. We did not get those aspirations. So it gets really confusing when you suddenly are up working in that. And I find that a lot of times media creators, especially now with the rate of change in the internet, is that 25 and unders are so far ahead of us that you're having to try to estimate what is working and not working. So you're actually having to pivot your worlds you're building as people are responding to them. But this was the journey. I realized that I was the Carol Danvers in the situation. And I was, in fact, when I'm in the room having these conversations, I am the second girl to ever be in that room in 80 years. If you talk about the room where it happens, right? For the Marvel Creative Universe, the way that the MCU connects, that's a room of dudes who figure that out. And there are 2 different people in that room who are not, street white guys like everybody else. And this is not I'm not mad at you street white guys, I love you. But there were 2 people. There was Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was an African-American writer and a friend of mine, who would argue for women. He would argue for Carol Danvers. And I would argue for Black Panther, which was his character. And then we were surrounded by guys who were like my brothers. They're some of my closest friends. And we still work together all the time. But getting in that room and staying in that room is like a crushing responsibility. And my friend, who's an Asian American author, calls it the rep sweats. Because when you're the one, you're just the only one. If you screw it up for every retired woman veteran who emails you every day, of which I get about 50 letters, right? Older women who served, who have been looking for this is a military hero. And the weight of that and the conversations I have about that are absolutely rep sweats worthy. So that's been the space I live in. And then I was the only girl to co-found the game studio. I have never met another woman who founded a game studio, ever. I know there are 3, but I've never met them. I was working at Bungie the last 2 years with the people who made Halo and Destiny. I was the senior creative woman. That was it. I got used to, in the game industry, the bathroom being my own office. I had a bookshelf. I walked into a room as a lead designer, and I had a bunch of engineers in the room, and a guy looked up at me and said, "Oh, look, the stripper's here." And that was the room I was in charge of, right? To be fair, that was a long time ago, but to be honest, my child is an engineer, and still flirting with other engineers means they hide her keys, so she can't go home, because then she has to stay there longer, right? Okay, so I realized Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, is alone at, with the hero of DC, Wonder Woman, and that's it. So she is the only girl in the room for those purposes. And I realized we were on the same journey. And I realized my mom had been on that journey too, and the struggle was the answer. So I realized that an origin story for a human, even a superhuman, is a family story. And it's about the mystery of our families. What is it about our families that makes us powerful? And what is it about our families that makes us weak? And what is it about being a woman that has kept you out of your role as a protagonist? And what is it that's going to make you powerful once you get there? How did any of us become the characters we are? I started basically looking at not Captain Marvel, but Carol Danvers, the human. And then I realized the role of new conversations. And I've been at Bungie, I worked in an incubation group for the last 2 years, which was really, as I was telling someone last night, it's like jamming, it's like being in a band where everyone plays a different instrument and you just get together every day and jam. And that's not generally how games are made. We have a lot of really siloed departments. And we had this experience of putting together a writer, an artist, an engineer, designer, these people from the beginning and structuring a different conversation. And I realized new conversations are all that matter. And I think about it in terms of politics, I think about it in terms of social change, I think about it in terms of content for sure, absolutely. You cannot make a new thing if you cannot have a new conversation. And you cannot have a new conversation if you don't change the people in the room. And that is not a diversity comment, that is a comment about invention. So I had this amazing experience where I had to have this marvelous, like a character summit. So we go quarterly for these big, huge summits with, the room where it happens. And so I had to have this private one for Captain Marvel that was like a good friend of mine, Steve Wacker, who invented the re-engineering of the character with Khaleesi Deconic, Sana Amanat, who created the first Pakistani-American superhero for Marvel and called Ms. Marvel, and Axel, my old editor-in-chief, who Axel Alonso, who I work with still, and then 2 editors. And so it was a very small room rather than the 100 people of the day before. But the chief creative officer, Joe Quesada, who runs the room, I sat next to him the day before, and he's blind like I am and super old. So he's holding his phone, and it literally says, "How come I have to sit next to Margaret?" The girl, right? Okay, he is like a stereotypic New Jersey sweats Tony Soprano and a big chain. Like, I know what he thinks I am, which is like, at the first time I went to that room, they said, "You just can't have such a girl chip on your shoulder." And I said to my friend, "I'm a girl, it's just called my shoulder." But I was like, holy crap, Joe hates me. And I had to spend 2 days with Joe, the most powerful man in Marvel creative, right? Not in the studio, but in the rest of the world building. I was doomed. And I was like, Joe hates what he thinks I am. And by the way, I hate what I think Joe is. So that's fair. And by the way, I don't want to sit by Joe either. Like, I had to have that talk with myself. So I was like, you know what? That's the important conversation right there, right? So how can Joe and I be in a room together? So for the 25 and under out there, I won't tell you that part of it had to do with me making a joke about anatomy. But it's true, I spent a lot of time with dudes and I didn't even think about it, because that's the other thing, like, there's no like rule set for what a bleeding heart liberal woman acts like and looks like or whatever. I read a lot of military history because I make games. I'm obsessed with Churchill, okay? I'm obsessed with World War II. It's how I related to Carol in a lot of ways was I would listen to Churchill while I was writing it. All those crackly old war addresses, they just make my blood run. So I've been reading a book about Vietnam called Matterhorn, you should read it. Written by a guy who was there, green shirt, come on, we're getting ready. But in part of it, there's a certain, there's a story of like, the opening is this guy who has to, I guess you can say pee when kids are around, but a leech crawls into a space where no leech should be during that procedure of, normal human relieving themselves. And in the mud in Vietnam, they have to cut that part of the body open to get the leech out, or the guy's gonna die. And it's like they're being attacked, they're being shot, it's pouring rain, there is mud everywhere, and a leech in a place when you really have to go that keeps you. I don't know why I'm looking at you, Tony, while I'm telling this story. Tony, you must have one of these. Thank you. So basically, I made this joke because I had started saying this thing where if you don't have a leech in your you don't have a problem, and I don't want to hear about it. So I ended up saying that to Joe Quesada, who laughed so hard he spit out his thing, and from then on he had to say, wow, you might be a human by my, you are not what I thought you were like. So we spent the next day in the room, and I sat next to Joe, right, without having to, and I said, Joe, you have a big Italian family. I have a big ex-Mormon, they're Mormon, ex-Mormon family. Let's get all the garbage out. What are your worst family stories? I'll tell you mine. Because my family is complex and messed up. So we got 5 people in a room who talked nonstop about horrible, terrible, sad, if you go back to visit your family, what happens in your family? And by the end of the day, the conversation had been so special that we knew we had a story that worked for Joe and worked for me, and he became one of my closest friends. To this day, my mom is sick, is dying. I left my work to go take care of her. He is flying out 15 people to come take me to a concert in Salt Lake City, Utah next week, which is a little awkward because I don't actually know what the struts are, so if someone could tell me about that would be useful. But good, we like it. It's a lifelong friendship that came from a real conversation. And by the time we left that room, I knew it would be great. We had solved the problem before I had written a word, and that has never happened to me before. It's actually not ever happened to me after. I hope it happens again. But it was this truth that what matters are conversations. And I think that sharing, being human together is what happened. And I started to hear from other readers that the parts that were resonating for them of this story, which was, by the way, a family story where Carol Danvers has a terrible relationship with her father historically, goes back to Maine, to their family summer home, to revisit things. Her brother gets in a car accident while she's there, and she's stuck there for 6 months and has to hash things out with her mother and her brother. And kind of put everything on pause and wrote a really emotional family-driven story, which of course I set at Winnie Lee's house in Maine, because we had been there, Sarah and Abby and I, for a long time, so I stole someone else's identity, life, town, and wrote about it. And I started hearing from boys as well as girls about being able to relate to a messed up family, or an alcoholic parent, or somebody who you are caring for who is ill, or feeling alone, or alienated from a place where you belonged, and all of these things. The human bits, the tricky bits, the messy bits, the part of your hero's journey that doesn't work out neatly is the part that everyone responded to. So here you can see the lessons. I'm not really good at coordinating the relationship between your PowerPoint and what you say, but that cover is special to me because it's a lighthouse by Uni's place in Maine. But it's also special because Joe Quesada drew it for me. He doesn't draw very much anymore. The guy who hated me. And I actually have one of those framed for Uni that I keep forgetting to give her. But the unlikely journey of that comic was as unlikely as the hero's journey of any girl creator or any girl superhero. And I think that was sort of the point. And the result was it's the only time that Captain Marvel ever went into reprints. And every single, multiple covers, they all sell out, they sold out all the time. So it was the biggest thing that had ever happened to her. This is a really funny slide because I also have presented this in China to some of my partners. So I literally had to break it down. What I have learned, being vulnerable helps you make vulnerable characters. This literally is what I had to say. Vulnerable is relatable. Relatable is sticky. Sticky is money. Losing sometimes helps you win. And I got a question. Do you mean losing sometimes helps you win? Or do you mean winning sometimes helps you win? I was like, you know what, we're gonna like take this from the top one more time. Okay, and this is a slide I just moved in from one of my teaching decks because I love to, you should also know this, I will come speak at your school, like always. The answer is usually yes. I don't charge for school visits. Most people make a lot of money on that. I view that as the religion part of what I do. So if I can swing it, if I can get to where you are, if it's on the way, your aunt's, friend's, cousin's school, yes, absolutely. Because I feel this passionately. I come from a family of depressives and queer kids, and everyone is a little gay or struggling in my house, artists, creators, and one engineer. Everybody feels alienated, lonely, and strange. It's a family of me. But so this is what I say to kids all the time. Like school is different from creating. In school, we spend a lot of time concealing who we are and fitting in and trying to be Teflon. But Teflon is the opposite of art and relatability and world building. So you have to reverse that thinking. Sucking is a superpower. Sucking makes you human. Even for humans, even superhumans, being human is more powerful than being super. You have to remember that. Never confuse sucking at one thing with sucking at everything. Nobody sucks at everything, not unless you're a pseudopod or cephalopod or creature literally made of suction cups, and even then you wouldn't suck at sucking, I rest my case. But it's true. And we don't understand that sucking is actually the glue. That's the clay you have to work with. So I tell 25 and under, pay attention to how you suck, because that's the important story. That's the story everyone wants to hear. Pay attention to why you suck. That's your important story. The more human you can be, the more openly human you can be, the more you can change the conversation. There's some staggering figure, like 85% of the world identifies as like incredibly, drivingly, like transformatively lonely. Like we are all just little trapped humans trying to find another human to attach to. 25 and under is way better at that. That's what fandom communities, that's what the internet has given them. And we are not so good. I want to show this. I always show this to teens. My kid just graduated from Interlochen last week, but my ADHD child and I, my trans child, would come home from school. Do you know what those colors are? Gel pen? That is a bored ADHD child drawing on their skin during the school that their big sisters went to, that they did not have the focus skills, right? And it's a thing, I know some of you work in education, you know there are some kids who I process better when I'm moving my hand. So for me, actually, I'll like type, I'll take like crazy, I'll write or type like crazy word for word notes when I'm sitting in a meeting. And people are like, what a nerd. But it's like how I listen. That is my kid trying to listen. And getting sent to the headmaster, right? Getting sent to the dean's office, because this is not a one-time thing. I should make an art book. Some of them are like liquid paper where the bones are. That was a beautiful one. But this is what I say to kids, just do not give up, because sometimes the things you suck are your great gifts. So this same kid, the summer after those arms, goes to Interlochen, as my kids always have, for art camp, and one teacher said to that kid, you know what, to me, you seem like a person who needs a wall. So my kid said, yeah, and painted a trans Garden of Eden on that wall, which ended up getting them a huge merit scholarship to Interlochen, where they just graduated with a big art award and had 2 art schools competing, got 2 offers of more than $100,000 to go to Chicago Art Institute or MICA. And that was 2 things, right? That was one teacher saying the one critical line that changed their life, but that was also like finding their way through, like understanding that the suck was also the gift. So that's kind of my mission, is to have that conversation over and over with kids and your friend's cousin's wife's kids. So that's what I've got. Obviously, I can talk for hours and hours. I'm super curious about your questions. Abby has a microphone, as does Mary. Yes, right, thank you. And feel free, ask me anything. Games, Marvel, books, Amherst, ADD, depression, queer kids, like I'm out there, whatever you need, go.
I apologize for asking a fairly naive question.
I like naive questions, they're easier.
With all those wonderful topics, I'm going to pick something fairly naive.
Yeah.
From your observation, what are the major mistakes that men seem to make when they're trying to write female protagonists?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've talked about, so one of my good friends, that's a good move. There are a group of guys who I bring in from Marvel to write games. One is Jerry Dugan, who wrote Deadpool for so long that kind of wrote it up to becoming a movie. One is Nick Spencer, who everyone hates because he made Captain America into Hydra, which is reads like a Nazi, kind of. But that's just what Nick is like. He's like an inflammatory, he used to work for a Democratic fundraising, he's just he sticks needles in you. And one is Mark Waid, who's written basically every character in the Marvel universe. So we had a fake company, we called ourselves Big Guns LTD, because we would get called in to fix terrible games with very few moments to spare. So we had a lot of talk along the way. And their answer was the same, which is, you just write them like humans. So, one of the things about this Captain Marvel backstory is I gave Captain Marvel a powerful mother to come from. And a superhero lineage, right? That's the same, that's there also with Diana in Amazonia for Wonder Woman, but that is where we come from, that is Superman's story, that is, those are formative stories. So the trick for successful men is to just treat them like characters. And then the trick that I've learned from having a non-binary trans child is you just ask. That's the trick in life, is you always hyper-communicate, and you always point at whatever you think the obstacle is in the room. So now with Joe Quesada, right? I don't even know if I would have said, if you don't have leech in your, the joke, I think I would have just said, Joe, man, what's this weird vibe between us? I think you're awesome. Here are the things I've loved about you as a human. Hyper-connect. So with my trans child, we had a jar on the table, on the dining room table, that just said they, and I had to put $5 in it every time I misgendered my child. Which, by the way, made my child weep with joy. They got a lot of money. Because that's an impossible thing to do, especially if you're an English major. Say a non-plural they. It's horrifying. But it was trying. It's just trying. So if you say, tell me what to do, I feel like a dork, you win. You win everything just for saying that. That's the real pivot. And see women as human. That's it. Great question. Anyone else?
What do you think of the Captain Marvel Valkyrie fanship?
So I think that it's great. I know there is a lot in Valkyrie's future. That's all. My life is a web of things I'm not allowed to say. I know there are big plans for Valkyrie. That is a character from the Thor movies, and they are. Tessa and Brie are good friends in real life. Brie Larson, the actress they cast for Captain Marvel, is a real life hero. Has made a decision to use her platform for good instead of evil, which is a decision every semi-public figure has to make every single day. So there is a lot of stuff going on. Marvel actually is ahead of the game because they have a really influential woman in charge of content named Sana on it. So they tend to be more progressive. In fact, you might have read about the backlash that they got for being too PC and changing too quickly. But I will tell you that the rate of change is so progressively faster, particularly for your generation and younger, that you will see the economics of having a more diverse character set, whether it's gay relationships or non-binary identities or more diverse, hero characters. You will see that happening more and more because the box office supports it. And so that becomes the critical thing, is how does product move? One problem in a global market is that, particularly for LGBTQ content, China is a problem and Russia is a problem, and some communities, when you suddenly are selling your same content everywhere, we jump through all these hoops to create content that can still legally get into the country, but can get there, but can still observe the law to get there. So you can find me, we can talk all about that. It's been a really interesting ride, but we had to do it. I created a line of digital comics for Destiny 2 at Bungie, so that the digital comics could sit on the website with the game, as Tracer did. I don't know if you know about Overwatch, so that you can define characters as gay from the portal of the game, but not in the game, but you can refer to the same characters, because legally you're allowed to do that. So there's a lot of weird workarounds you do for China in particular. Yeah.
Why don't they make the women characters look more like women versus the hypersexualized? And I saw that commercial where they're doing changing into their game personality. Why do you have to have the 15-inch waist and
So, did you guys hear that? Oh my gosh. You're preaching to the choir. Yes, so one thing I'll say is that having an artist child, my child goes to a million different art programs, and no matter what, if you get into animation or character design, anything about a character, there's these standard materials where they'll give you a sheet of 50 faces for male characters and one face that's a woman that's shaped like a heart. We are coming from so behind, right? And the really amazing thing is seeing the work, just coming back from Interlochen, which is in the art sporting school my kid just graduated from, and seeing the body shapes that 25 and under draw. So that will go away. There is a real movement to make women look like women, to make women and anyone of any identity look like all kinds of different humans. And it's not just a woman thing. Again, the game Destiny 2 I worked on, there were no Asian character options. You could not customize, you know what I mean? The default of the content space has been set to straight white men for so long that even when you're in a company that has a lot of diverse employees making content, we end up censoring ourselves because we know what the content space has to look like, and it looks a certain way. So you will get women drawing you those women, right? But the answer to all things is the next generation will put up with none of this. Absolutely none of this. So it's been answered, no worries. All my faith, we destroyed the planet. We've done everything horrendous, and they will be living in a dystopia that we made, but they are 25 and under they are light years ahead of us in terms of humanity. Yeah.
As you said, the most effective way for planning an event for kids 25 and under is having them plan it.
Yeah.
Why are there not more kids in the field writing comics and coming up with these characters?
You know, that's another brilliant question. When I talk to kids all the time, one of the things I do is say, look, I work with artists who got their job by posting fan art in deviantart.com. I work, Eric Zicklin will tell you, people get gigs off writing jokes on Twitter. He's a comedy writer from class of '89. Game jobs, people show their Minecraft, build out, or they show the mods they made, or they show, what they've done online. When my daughter, my middle child, met her boyfriend, brought him over, the first thing we did was look at all his Spore models, which was a game he played, and we were like, wow, look, you didn't go out that Halloween. You were home making Spore, nerd. You fit right in. But your online life now is your portfolio. So it's not quite the same as why don't we have kids making those important things. The answer is increasingly we do. I'm the oldest person you will ever meet in your entire life. I appear to you today as a miracle of modern science. But generally, I work with one of my good friends, as I said, Veronica Roth, wrote Divergent in her 20s at college. So my assistant, who is now the producer of my 30,000 person festival from last month in LA, has been working with me since she was 14. You just have to take yourself seriously. I promise you get into the room from doing that. But it's increasingly more and more the point. I was buying art. Interlochen graduation, I spent $2,000 in art on young artists because their stuff was so amazing. And I would negotiate with them, and they'd be like, I asked around, because it's my first sale. You think this print is $100, worth $100? There'd be this big pause, and I'd say, well, I think it's at $250. Those opportunities increasingly are out there. So you just do it. And you encourage everyone else to do it. And then, when something you don't like, you use your voice and you say it. Because I also know all the people paid by Marvel and DC to track all the, the Twitter feeds and the Tumblr posts or whatever. My kid painted this picture of our cat. It's called "It's the First Day of Summer, My Cat Had Fleas," and there are 50,000 comments on it on Tumblr. Right? Someone made it a meme, and but your community is active and strong. You guys are the strong people in the room, so you just do it. Yeah.
Hey, Marie. Thank you for doing this. It's incredible. In the 80s, early 90s, I was a huge X-Men reader, and they were seen as the odd ones out in the Marvel universe. And now they came mainstream for a long time, and now they've changed it back. But if you could do an X-Men character, which one would you love to take a new shot at?
That's a great question. X-Men are back on their rise. It's so sad when you realize all of those things are because of mergers, right? But we got X-Men back as a property. My friend Jonathan Hickman is taking over it with a storm. He pitched out what he's going to do for them in the room 3 years ago. I was horrified, which is the reaction Jonathan Hickman always wants. But for me also, because if you have LGBTQ kid, I sat in the gender center at LA Children's Hospital, and they have X-Men movies on loop, right? Because if you are a misfit or you don't identify in your body or your world, the X-Men are sacred ground. So Jonathan is not you give a good writer sacred ground, and the first thing they do is blow it all up. So Jonathan and I have been in a fight about the X-Men for 3 years. But I know this is a boring answer. There's a character named Kitty Pryde that has a lot going on, so Kitty Pryde is the gig I would take. But I think I will always have a soft spot for Wolverine, just because of the pain and feeling it's such a great literalization of your gift is your curse. Which we all can relate to, but great question. You should read X-Men though, tons of stuff happening. One more. Actually, one more and then we'll take you because you're so cool looking. Okay. Yeah. No, you too. Yeah. Go.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us, Margaret. My question is, I'm wondering if you, from your experiences, feel that there are any stories that you are still waiting to be heard and told, either through the MCU or through young writers.
Ooh, that just gave me goosebumps. Yeah, I'm waiting for your stories. I agree with you that I'm waiting for the world to be taken over by the 25 and unders. I'm waiting for more authentic stories, local stories, regional stories. Everyone who's worked in content is so tired of the Hollywood American media machine that goes outward to the world and we don't bring anything in from the rest of the world. So actually, 25 and under in the United States has finally connected a lot of anime back into North American, Western culture. But that and I'm having everyone in my family be like some degree of gender nonconforming or gay. I'm really looking for a lot more of that. My ex-husband said, we should just put like a magnet up on the fridge with a piece of paper with a line on it that says, how gay are you today? And you can just move it. And also one that says, what gender are you today? And you can just move it, just so we're all on the same page. But I do think that there is this incredible energy to youth culture that I really hope continues to transform the rest of us losers, because there's a lot of work to do. So more millennial and Generation Z stories is what I feel. You'll see more of that. Great question. And then you, with your rad look.
If you could write any other Marvel story, which one would it be?
I know this, so I'm actually famous for this online because I work Tony Stark into everything I do. In fact, my first Black Widow novel, which my friend got read, they cut about 70 pages of Tony Stark blah blah out of it. Because I have like a little evil Tony Stark that sits on my shoulder all the time telling bad jokes. And so like there's something about his like flawed ego and like his inability to shut up that I relate to so intensely. And his heart is in the right place, but he just like he's smart and gets himself into jams all the time and makes terrible decisions and has to deal with it always. But that is I actually, it's not that I love him, it's that I kind of am him. So that's the one I'm waiting to write, and all of Marvel knows it. In fact, they send me Tony Stark stuff to comment on a bunch of, they're like, does this sound like Tony? I'm a Tony Stark expert. So thank you for asking. What a great question to go out on. Feel free to come find me.